passing that we have now set up a Discord server for whatever you want to do with Discord. If you want to bring your dank memes, feel free to use the link I've provided in the description. So as far as I can tell, and apparently based on what the community gathers, DICE has pretty much killed off Ammo 2.0. I see no reason to doubt the common knowledge that Ammo 2.0 is dead, simply based on the fact that everything related to Ammo 2.0 was stripped from the spring patch, and there appears to be no more solicitations of feedback regarding Ammo 2.0 from the developers. It seems to me then that the idea has been completely scrapped, and I see no reason for this other than community demand. After all, that's literally the only reason that there could have been to kill it. With a few tweaks, it was working perfectly. As I demonstrated, it was both reducing grenade spam while also keeping playability intact. So in this video, I want to assert three things. First, that the loudest voice, or even the outright majority, is not always right. Secondly, the community doesn't always know what they want, and misapprehensions regarding the game are actually enhanced rather than diminished when considering a group of people rather than an individual. Lastly, the PR status gained from listening to community feedback, I do not feel will save a bad game from itself. And as a final point, I'd like to make some suppositions on why DICE chose the last couple months to focus on this Ammo 2.0 system rather than what I and other community members see as more pressing concerns. For those that were not aware, DICE and some community managers put together a little live stream the other day detailing the changes that would be coming in the spring patch. I think my favorite part of the stream was when they were trying to demonstrate the fact that grenades needed an ammo crate to be resupplied, rather than simply auto-regenerating. The best part of that was they couldn't find an ammo crate. Even though they were not particularly far from any objective, they were right up within the mass of blueberries, and yet they tried to demonstrate this point that you needed an ammo crate, and they just couldn't find an ammo crate. So they moved on to the next topic. As a lead-in to my first point, I wanted to reiterate some of the points that I had made in a prior video for those that hadn't watched that particular set of videos. To state it as succinctly as I can, auto-replenish as far as ammo and gadgetry goes, the idea that auto-replenish invalidates support is like Gear 1 on a car invalidating Gear 5. Can you cruise on the freeway on Gear 2? You probably can, but it's not very good for your car, and it's not very effective either. It would be much more effective to use Gear 5. Having a support resupply you is like Gear 5. Relying on auto-regen is like Gear 1. It does the job, but really not very well. If you want to watch this prior video, I have linked it in the description. The second bit, that Ammo 2.0 is actually reducing grenade spam, is entirely true. This is perfectly well supported by data. But feels over reals, right? Apparently this particular fact did not match what people felt when playing the game. So I guess they decided to just ignore the facts and trust their feelings, their subjective, their cognitively biased feelings instead. So that brings me to my first point. The loudest voice, or even the outright majority in a community, is not always right. The last time I covered this topic, I completely dismissed the idea that the outright majority should have a distinct influence in the course of the game's development as a complete argumentum ad popularum fallacy, and some people called me out on it for probably good reason. I didn't explain it at all, I just asserted it. So what I want to do here is I want to fully squish the notion that the fact that a voice or an idea is held by the majority gives it any more merit than it would have otherwise. An idea or argument is lent no more weight by being held by the majority of a population as opposed to the minority. And so because I never want to hear the ad popularum argument again, I will spend a little bit more time on it than some people would like me to. So yes, it is a well-established fallacy, but I will now explain why. What people said to me is, isn't the majority rule the foundation for modern politics? I mean, besides the fact that democracy itself is completely untenable and failed every time it was used, and while I'm not going to get into the difference between a representative republic and a democracy right now, there are many reasons that make this statement, the idea that democracy should govern how our games should be developed. There's many reasons that make this statement fallacious. So in order to examine this issue in a full manner, before we can look at Battlefield, we have to see the matter in a broader context of the real world to get a better understanding of the issue. So there's a simple question we can ask here, and that is, do populations in the real world always act in their own interest when ruled by majority? Fortunately for us, this is extremely easy to answer, as Enlightenment-era political theorists spent a whole lot of time discussing this issue. The first example of this I could find in Hamilton reads as follows. There have been, if I may so express it, almost as many popular as royal wars. The cries of the nation and the importunities of their representatives have, upon various occasions, dragged their monarchs into war, or continued them in it, contrary to their inclinations, and sometimes contrary to the real interests of the state. Blah, blah, blah. It is well known that the antipathies of the English against the French, seconding the ambition, or rather the avarice of a favorite leader, protracted the war beyond the limits marked out by sound policy, and for a considerable time in opposition to the views of the court. In other words, populations tend to be pretty bad at actually gauging what is in their best interest. In fact, the entire basis of the American political system, which is obviously the best, was designed to combat the mischief the majority of the population can get to. Madison calls this faction. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, or united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. The point is that it doesn't really matter whether a view is held by a majority or a minority. If it's bad, it's still bad regardless. If the arguments against Ammo 2.0 are held by the majority of the community, that does not make them any better. So now that I've gotten through that, I never want to hear the idea that game design should be in any way a democracy ever again. Second point, the community does not always know what they actually want, and misapprehensions that various people hold are enhanced rather than diminished when considering them in a group of people. The simple fact of the matter is that most people are not well informed enough to understand what they really want in a game. Either they have no understanding of game data, and so fall prey to cognitive biases, which prevents the acquisition of an accurate view, and so they are unable to make determinations as to what would be good or bad for the game, or they have the partial understanding of the game, which, in my opinion, is arguably worse. In this, the player thinks he understands game data, and because of this, he makes confident assertions about game design, based on his incomplete knowledge. As an example, something I read the other day, a player was telling another player that the Automatico has no more spread than the MP18, in response to a prior statement that had been made saying that the MP18 was better than the Automatico at range due to its less spread. And while that is technically true, the Automatico has no more base spread than the MP18, it's fake news. The base spread on the Automatico is the same as the MP18, but the spread increase per shot, first shot multiplier, and horizontal recoil are all completely different. This means that the Automatico will be much less accurate, pretty much regardless of how you're bursting it, due to the increased spread increase, as well as the substantial horizontal recoil, which, being completely random like spread, functions in a similar manner. Players like this, with incomplete knowledge, have a potential to influence other players. Unwittingly, they will present biased or incomplete information to present a certain inaccurate picture of the game. Others can have at least a partial understanding of the game's data, but are too heavily influenced by their biases to actually make use of it to gain a better understanding of the game. A key point from the definition of cognitive bias on Wikipedia is where individuals create their own subjective reality from their perception of the input. This perfectly describes a recent conversation I had on Reddit, where a developer had helpfully provided some data showing that the Hellriegel did in fact have 60% more horizontal recoil than the MP18, and despite that clear fact being perfectly obvious, the player continued to insist that the developer was wrong and horizontal recoil was somehow applied differently to the Hellriegel than it was to the MP18, because he felt that the Hellriegel did not have substantially more horizontal recoil than the MP18 did, and went on to say that whenever he has spoken in Battlefield 1 message boards, he has gotten a similar reply, that others have said that the Hellriegel does not have any more horizontal recoil than the MP18 does. So this illustrates nicely the fact that without a sufficient understanding of game data, people can make observations that do not at all reflect reality whatsoever. And while you might think that these biases would be diminished when considered in a group, In other words, that these ideas would somehow be tempered and be averaged to the point of actually reflecting reality to some extent. It becomes worse rather than better in a group, as players often tend to feed off one another's misconceptions. One player says to another player, "Don't you think the Hellriegel doesn't have very much recoil compared to the MP18? And while they didn't really think that before then, well, now they're going to keep that in mind when they're using the Hellriegel and maybe come up with the conclusion that it really does not, in fact, have much more recoil than the MP18. Players can very easily push their biases, unwittingly or not, onto others, which causes a groupthink, wherein a large collection of people believe something that does not actually reflect reality. Third and final point. I can understand the desire to create a good PR image from listening to community feedback, but I do not believe that listening to community feedback is a good idea when it will make the game worse. You know, I assume that you hired your gameplay designer based on his merit. Maybe you should listen to him over the people whining on Reddit. People who I have shown have no grasp on how the game actually works. Yes, I do understand that it will be a PR hit from completely disregarding a large amount of whining. But it seems to me that it would be more valuable to listen to your gameplay designer who has proven himself time and time again to be able to create good gameplay, rather than people who are unwilling to drop their biases. You know, I'm sure if you implemented the full version of Ammo 2.0 rather than the half-measure compromise that we have now in the CTE, I'm pretty sure people would grow on it because, well, it just flat out works. It provides good, non-frustrating gameplay, but also enhances the value of support and diminishes gadget spam. Finally, a question that I had seen posed frequently on the Battlefield subreddit is why was Ammo 2.0 being worked on when there were much more pressing issues? And I agree, there were much more pressing issues, but as far as I can tell, and this is just supposition on my part, it only requires one individual to work on the ammo stuff, just the gameplay designer. He doesn't need any other coordination. You notice that the UI, which would have required coordination, was never approached in regards to Ammo 2.0. So I suppose it can get done faster because it only requires one person working on it. On the other hand, almost all the other issues that a lot of people see as pressing require the intervention of a large array of people with different skills. And it's very obvious that other things besides Ammo 2.0 are in fact being worked on at the studio.